So I have gone back to my favourite and best Stormweaver build. I have made some serious improvements, and I thought I'd test them on Arbiter of Ash, finally. And yeah, I just kind of instantly hit him for nearly 7 million damage, which is his entire health pool, and it was really anticlimactic. Hello, my fellow Stormweavers! I am so excited and proud to share with you what I truly believe to be the perfected form of Lightning Warp Stompage. And yes, that was in the background just a random tier 17 map boss that kind of accidentally died in the background of me doing a breach, which amused me greatly. So what have I done then? Well, two things. Refined the build to make it a lot more simple and straightforward, while also explosively increasing the damage output, while also massively increasing its survivability. We are now all in on cast on crit. We're not even using cast on shock anymore because it's not needed. Cast on crit is going to trigger and send lightning conduits out constantly. And the reason for that is simple. My lightning warp has a base now 37% chance to crit. That is really good. That gets even more when we allow for malice constantly going on, making everyone have critical weakness. This then is coupled with the fact that we now have a permanent critical damage bonus of 300%. Yeah, over triple the default damage increase of a crit, which makes things hit hard. Because yes, of course, we are still using our double shock strike twice with plenty of magnitude, to the lightning conduit itself with 100% more damage per 5%. Coupled with the automatic exposure that we get to put on everything, yeah, this is silly. But because we now are critting so much, cast on critical against especially your rares and your bosses immediately goes off. You can see in the Arbiter clip, right, I had 0% of the cast on critical ready, and how many hits did it take to make it pop? 3. It went 8%, 50%, and then it triggered. And that was 3 out of the opening 5 lightning warps. It's seriously consistent. And that's why we no longer need a cast on shock for another one. We don't need comets involved. We don't need to have another trigger going, because this happens so often that it's more than enough and lets us do some very much delicious things with the rest of our spirit left over from using the scepter and gaining that massive extra 218 spirit. Such as this double defensive option. Grim Feast we know about, it's ridiculous, will give us double our energy shield and make us incredibly hard to kill, but now I have worked in Blasphemy, which will pulse out our curse as an aura, and the curse of choice is Temporal Chains, which means every enemy that gets close to us is slowed, and a slowed enemy is much less likely to stun lock you into oblivion or even hit you at all. So when you're teleporting all over the place, constantly locking everything down with Temporal Chains just passively, you feel like a god. This is so effective, and you are seeing it, of course, in all of the background footage. We have ourselves here a tier 18, a corrupted, irradiated, and a tier 16 base corrupted waystone boss, and, well, yeah, it's just kind of a joke. And the best part of all of this is it's fairly cheap to put together for the amount of power you get out of it. I firmly, as I said at the start, do believe that if I had infinite divine orbs to spend on perfect gear, the peak form of this teleport explosion death is going to be better than the peak form of Spark. It just has that much high end going for it, but the minimum amount of power it pumps out is ridiculous too. So the raw skeleton of this is very similar to what we went over last time, and I will link that down below, and I recommend you giving that a go as well, as it's very thoroughly detailed on how this entire thing works. But the secret sauce this time around then in our new pure cast on crit and crit in general focus is we're getting a bit of dexterity because we are using this Maligaro's Virtuosity Fine Braces. This then is wonderful for two main reasons. The extra 30% increased critical hit chance is lovely, it powers everything, but your critical damage bonus is 300%. This then just sets it to 300%, which, outside of it making your crits hit way harder than default, means something extra. It means that anything that lowers your critical damage bonus actually doesn't, because this just overwrites it and sets it to 300. So we can grab things like Careful Assassin for a huge increase in crit chance and completely ignore the negative of reducing your damage bonus. That is glorious, and it unlocks some serious potential. So without further ado then, let's get properly into this new supreme version of the Telestomp, as you guys have been calling it, raining down constant, massively impactful lightning conduit blasts on everything around you. You've seen how much the cast on crit is going off just in general mapping. It's ludicrous, and absolutely deleting bosses left and right. This thing I think is really special, and I really hope you guys agree. As for when to actually kind of switch to this and play this more crit focused, much higher damage version, well, you want to make sure you have at least 4,000 mana, as that's the kind of minimum to have enough fuel and regen, because with how often Lightning Conduit goes off, you do actually churn through your mana at times. You also want to make sure that you have at least on your Lightning Warp, I would say 30% chance to crit. The more the better, but at least 30% from your gear and your skill tree, which will probably take you about level 80-ish worth of points, but you might be able to get away with it a little bit sooner. Other than that, it is a Chaos Inoculation build with Mind Over Matter, so our damage comes out our shield first, then our mana that we take. We only have the 1 health, but more than worth it to be immune to Chaos damage, and Eldritch Battery while retaining a shield, thanks to the Everlasting Gaze. The kind of standard stuff, you know, every Stormweaver is doing. So with that said, let's get into the details here. Beginning then with the usual, have yourself a second weapon set, and in that second weapon set have Sigil of Power, so you can slap that down and do a lot more damage. On weapon set 2 then, you want to have Blink. Click the little arrow, make sure it's just selected on 2 and not 1, and you are good to go. Everything else from your Lightning Warp, and well, again, everything else selected on 1 and not 2, so you've got that set up nicely. Then we have Malice just happening as an aura from your scepter that you need to have with Malice on it, but we'll stress that in the gear section. And then we can get on with firstly Blink, which yes, in your second weapon set means that you can swap to it and then Blink, which is immensely helpful in many situations, and while not required for the build, I always recommend that you have it essentially on every build on any Ascension. Then we have ourselves Archmage, of course, the big juicing damage. Like, it is ridiculous. Like, we go from 8,000 DPS to 41k with just Archmage, and there's many more mana I could still stack. In any case, on Archmage, you want your Lightning Mastery. If you have a level 21, so you can push it to 21. If not, the Lightning Mastery isn't going to do a lot, but it's still an alright place for it to sit to make the build less intensive on mana. And then Clarity, if you have the 10 spare spirit, if you have at least as much spirit as I'm getting from this scepter, the extra mana regen is very, very nice to have. Lightning Warp then, the big main event here. You want to have 40% more area on it, so, you know, it's massive when it explodes and does that delicious shocked ground to keep everything permanently shocked for the cast on crit Lightning Conduit. Then we want Overcharge, so that magnitude is increased hugely for even bigger Lightning Conduits. Then we want want exposure, so we automatically apply lightning exposure to anything that stands in this massive zone, and then we make that exposure even more intense to really scale up our damage for that inevitable huge 300% crit damage lightning conduit. And lastly, inspiration, so we actually can cast all of this without constantly running out of mana, because it really is quite intensive. I can only just kind of spam it, but even then I'm slowly draining. Without this on, I mean, you can see the drastically different effect. It's a very valuable support gem. Ball lightning itself then, we just tool this to fire as many of them out as possible so we can teleport on top of them. So for that we want arcane tempo so we can get them out quicker, so we spend less time casting ball lightning, which is when we're most vulnerable in this build, and then unleash for even more ball lightnings, wild shards for even more ball lightnings, and the circle around you gives you more directional options for your teleport, and then scattershot for even more ball lightnings. If I had myself a full set of support gem options here, you would want to put in mobility as your final one, so we can just move and cast even easier with the ball lightning. It is a luxury though, and not at all needed. Then cast on crit, another very important cornerstone of this. You want to put in your lightning conduit here, and then support it with the following: impetus, so it goes off 40% faster, and then considered casting, so it hits 40% harder, inevitable critical, so it's even got a higher chance to crit. This has like 45% crit chance, which is ridiculously good. A coin flip on doing nuclear damage, and then elemental focus, so it does even more damage. Then we want blasphemy on and active, and in that you want to put temporal chains, so everything is AoE slowed around you. And then we just want to intensify it with heightened curse. Then we get ourselves Grim Feast on, so we pick up loads of energy shield souls from those that we kill to make ourselves even tankier. I do technically have a manual conduit sat here just to show that you can if you like pressing it, but we don't really have anything to support it, it's just an option. And then conductivity down here just to activate weapon set 2, and if I ever want to actually use it. Obviously blasphemy is pumping out temporal chains, which is our curse slot, and we don't have double curses. It is a shame that conductivity isn't something you can just AoE onto everyone, otherwise that would be great, but it is what it is. That is your skill gem setup then. When it comes to piloting this, it could not be more straightforward, because now it really is just the two buttons. Fire your ball lightnings out, teleport on top of them, and that's it. Just progress through the map doing that, and you'll find yourself just ruining everything. The only slight little extra layer is if you're about to fight a boss, put down your sigil of power, and, well, stand on it doing the teleporting for even more damage. Because temporal chains is constantly going on around you, you'll have a lot more breathing room, it'll be a lot harder to get chain stunned to death, it'll be a lot harder to get frozen because less freezing attacks will be hitting you, and it just really provides that extra defensive layer to combat a couple of issues the build does have. I have never been more consistently alive until I started playing this version of the teleport stomp. Skill tree then. For your ascension, it's the usual constant gale, force of will for permanent enhanced arcane surge, double shock with your strike twice, and then the Scouring Winds to have an extra 20% on our exposure that's just being applied for free. Then off we go. If you have as your amulet want the extra tankiness, then you want to go right through the shield nodes. If you want to just play full glass cannon, then you want to go left through the damage nodes, but otherwise we end up in the same place. So that's that. Get your energy shield all the way to pure energy, then to dampening shield, stopping down here for mana blessing, and then we go up. Now here is where I need to make the note that yes, this requires yourself to have 73 Dex to equip. Now it's more than worth it, as you've been seeing, but it does mean you need to get, well, to 73 Dex. And the best way to do that is to use your 5 Dex passive nodes on your travel paths on your skill tree. I'm currently sat at that exact 73 Dex, and that's just from switching all of these to Dex. So make sure you have enough of them on plus 5 Dex to actually use it. The same with your scepter that needs 54 strength, which is why I've got a few plus 5 strength nodes so I can actually equip that too. So priority 1 on your attribute nodes is enough Dex and strength to actually equip your gloves and and your scepter. Now, because the gloves give dexterity, once you actually equip them, you can then undo 3 of the dexterity nodes, in my case, because it's plus 16, back to int. Just don't then unequip the gloves, or you'll have to respec 3 nodes back into dex to re-equip them, and then put those 3 back to int, if that makes sense. Alrighty then, we want to initially branch right and then head all the way up here to get a bigger area effect on our lightning warp explosions, 30% in fact. It is very, very huge, and then we get to this little crossroads. We'll initially go right through the jewel slot and then up to your eldritch battery for that huge mana increase, and then up to arcane intensity for that huge damage increase. Continuing on through raw mana until we end up here, initially going left to go up and get both power conduction for that shock magnitude, and then pure power for again another huge damage increase from all our intelligence, and then 1 point over just to get another jewel slot, as they are very, very potent. Then back to here, up for a start of our crit chance building, and that's one of the things this works so much, because the gloves handle our crit damage bonus. We free up a lot of skill points to just go into pure crit chance to make that cast on crit both consistent and to make that huge damage critical lightning conduit happen as often as possible. In any case, controlling magic. Then we go over to get 25 intelligence and then continue down here. 1 more jewel slot, grab yourself chaos inoculation for that lovely chaos immunity, and then we arrive here where we will grab ourselves careful assassin for another huge increase in crit chance, and then we continue on to grab another valuable jewel slot, and then finally here just to poke over and get the more lightning damage, which is a huge increase, and I'm really happy to have this. Being able to get this is one of the reasons that these gloves are so good, because we don't need to spend points again on critical damage bonus, so this is massive. Then we can return all the way back to this initial crossroads, and now we're going left through another jewel slot, and then initially down to here and up into mind over matter, and then improving our arcane surge. Up top for another jewel slot, and then we go over here to get a load of cast speed. For whatever reason, the 1 out of 1 HP from chaos inoculation is counting as low life for this node, so it's just 20% free cast speed, which is really, really good return for the points investment and really speeds up the build. Then we head back down here, up into some elemental damage, the resist, and then even more crit chance and more damage after critting, which is all the time, and even more magnitude of shock for lightning conduit. Then we head down here, fully get this for all of the energy shield and the maximum mana, get the stun threshold and the +5 all attributes, which is especially useful here for both the dex and the strength, and then we continue on to this jewel slot, where we now get this entire ring for both the increased area of effect and damage on our lightning warp itself. This is just a really nice skill tree in my opinion, and works really well for what we're trying to do. So, your jewels then. You want, ideally, in specifically this slot, so it gets as many nodes as possible, a Against the Darkness Timeless Diamond with 1% increased mana per small passive. The reduced freeze duration is nice. If it ever does trigger, it goes away pretty damn quick, but that 1% mana is really, really good. Not the end of the world if you can't, but it does help. In all of your other jewel slots, you want the following. 20% magnitude of shock, that is the single most important thing. The second most important thing is increased area of effect for the lightning warp size. Then after that, you want to get a critical strike chance with your spells, raw spell damage, and then anything else that's just useful, like increased energy shield, like any cast speed, or so on and so forth. The meta skills gaining energy is quite nice to have here too. So that's your jewels, which takes us on to gearing this. You want your Sigil of Power staff in your weapon set 2, and then on your wand, which you want to pair with the scepter, you want to ideally have increased critical hit chance for spells and gain mana when an enemy is killed. It'll keep your mana nice and topped up for all the lightning conduits blasting out that are quite expensive, and the more crit chance, the better the build runs in general. The rest is usual mana, spell damage, ranks to lightning lightning spell skills, mana regen is fine too, more lightning damage is fine too. You want very specifically a scepter with malice on, and enough spirit on it to give you the ability to put on every single spirit consuming passive we have. Remember to quality it up, as that will give you an appreciable amount more spirit as well, though in general you should just be qualitying everything that you have here. And to be fair, talking of quality, just to mention it, you really want to quality archmage up to 20%, you want to quality lightning warp up to 20%, and you want to quality cast on critical up to 20%. Everything else does help, but they are the big three. In any case, then, the rest of the gear is primarily initially to get you to your resist caps of 75% where possible, and then after that, as much energy shield to then translate to as much mana as possible on every single available piece. Then we go in to your mana helpers. You want just raw increased mana. Intelligence is good too. You want to make sure you've got up to 35% movement speed on your boots. Stun threshold isn't bad. And general lightning damage on your ring can be quite good too. And the usual, magic find. That's kind of the gear. Then we get into uniques. So very specifically, you want to have the Maligaro's Virtuosity Fine Braces, as that crit damage bonus is everything here, on top of even more crit chance. You want to have the Everlasting Gaze Azure Amulet, so we still have an energy shield despite playing Eldritch Battery. The mana modifiers are also really good. Make sure you quality it up with Neural Catalyst. And then ideally you want to have the Ingenuity Utility Belt. I have finally got one, and no, I'm not brave enough to val it before you say anything, but this is not required at all. You can wear the usual Midnight Braid Rawhide belt for the extra mana regen when you take damage, and that's completely fine too. Ideally, of course, I would have Dream Fragments instead of one of these rings, but that's still my final chase item. I am, well, desperately chasing. Then in your gear rune slots, you ideally want to have 2% increased max mana wherever possible, except on your chest where you want 40% increased energy shield, but if you do need help on your resist, you can use one of the resist runes. That then is that. The full all-in on crit, much higher damage, much higher consistency, and much harder to kill version of Lightning Warp Ball, Lightning Telestomp, Lightning Conduit loveliness. I am very, very happy with this. I really don't think it gets much better outside of just generically better gear, but I of course will keep you posted, especially if any changes, happen patch-wise. For now then, like if you enjoyed this, subscribe and hit the bell for more, consider supporting the future of the channel on Patreon down below, and until we meet again, a goodbye.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.